Yes, it's a great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Jasmijn Sybenga to the I practiced to the UHI Archaeology Institute seminar. And Jasmijn, as we know her, is a recent graduate. Graduated with a PhD from the Archaeology Institute and then moved on to an exciting career in Amsterdam. So in her PhD, she worked on a palaeoecological project where she investigated 3 areas in the Flow country in northern Scotland that's under the care of Forestry and Lands Scotland. And then she moved to Amsterdam, where she now works for Partners in Innovation as a consultant in nature policy and innovative land use, working with NGOs, local authorities, government and other companies in the Netherlands, Europe, and even Western Africa. So we're very, very excited to hear more about your research now. Jasmijn, over to you.
Thank you very much. Very nice introduction. Good to be back presenting something for the Archaeological Institute in Orkney. I do miss the place very much. So I will share my presentation with you. One moment. Almost there, almost ready. I think you can see the screen now, can't you? Yeah. All right. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to this seminar. Yeah, as you heard, I'm Jasmijn Sybenga, and recently, not that recent anymore, in December last year, I finished my PhD at UHI Orkney. I did a research in northern Scotland, so I thought I'd start out with showing you, the landscape that I did my research in. Let me see if I can get a pointer. Yes. So this is northern Scotland. In this area, especially northern Scotland, that's an area of one of the largest and most intact areas of blanket bog in the world, and even the largest in Scotland, well, in Europe. So that's all of this. It's even on the go to become a World Heritage Site. So we have to wait and see if it gets accepted. That would be amazing. So in this area, my 3 research sites are located. So here you can see Rowans in the northeast, Brea more inland, and Daltrock, which is located in province of Sutherland, and this is Caithness. As you can see, these areas have been extensively forested in the past by the Forestry Commission. And because of this, the peatland that was once there got really demolished. It was really dried out, and it's really bad for the peatland. And now the Forestry Commission, that's called now Forestry and Land Scotland, they understand the value of peatlands, as peatland are really good in storing carbon healthy peat regulate water runoff, and it can contribute to flood mitigation. And of course, peatlands, they support a specialized biodiversity. So Forestry and Land Scotland, they really wanted to try to get the peatland in a more healthy state. And in the same process, they try to see ways in getting different types of woodlands in these areas. And that's where I come in. So to show you a little bit more about the landscape, so you get an understanding of how treeless it is, I have a little video for you. So as you can see, nowadays there are no woodlands present, except those non-native coniferous trees that were planted there by the Forestry Commission back in 1980, 1990. And the overall aim of this research is to use paleoecological data to reconstruct past woodland communities that formed the natural woodland of northern Scotland, and also what the difference is between those three areas that I showed you. Is the woodland different in the past? How did it develop? And secondly, I tried to identify the causes for the decline of these woodlands. So why are there no trees nowadays? And thirdly, I tried to see if I can use that data to give information about whether it's possible to bring these woodland types back. So what I did is I went to these areas and I took peat cores in these landscapes, and that are cores of about 6 meters long. And with that, I extracted the pollen grains within. So from every 4 centimeters of those 6 meters, I extracted some sediment, and I went to a laboratory, got all the pollen grains out, and I identified them. So basically every type of tree or every plant, everything has their own type of pollen grains. So by looking at it, you can see what kind of plants, trees were growing in the landscape over time. So these are my 3 research aims that I told you, that I briefly introduced when you were looking at the nice video of the landscape. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the different research aims and show you how I got to answers to these questions. So we start out with the reconstruction of past woodland communities. All right. So here you see, okay, I will try to explain it. So the timeline goes from 11,000 years ago until now. So that's for every type of tree. So this is birch, the development of birch from 11,000 years ago until now. And then pine, alder, elm, oak, hazel, and willow. What it shows you, where there's a line. So the 3 different lines are the different research sites. So you have the rowans, which is the green, and then the darker green is Dalchalk, and then Brehour is lighter green. So I will just quickly show you this. It's not really important for this presentation, but it's good to see, how you can tell that some trees were growing locally. So what you can see above the lines, so this line and the red line here, is the moment in time that the trees became present at those locations. So at 10,000 years ago, birch is coming into Rowan's area, and it fluctuates and disappears again around 8,000 years ago and pops up again. So this is that the pollen grains, the amount of pollen grains are so, the amount of pollen grains show that the trees were growing there locally. If it's below the line, the pollen grains are still present, but because pollen grains are so small and they are very light and they're designed to fly over large distances, the small amount only reflects pollen grains that came into the area from further away, so it's not locally present. So here I showed the development of woodland communities in the different areas. I tried to make a schematic overview, but it might be still a bit difficult. So again, from 11,000 years ago until now. And this is Rowans, this is Brehour, and this is Dalchalk, the third one. And it shows that from, for example, here at this time, there are no trees present. So I try to make it with a little drawing. There are just sedges, and it's a period right after the last ice age, so it's still cold and dry, and trees didn't migrate into the landscape at this time. But from 10,000 years ago, at Rowans, you see a peak in birch, and this is the moment that birch trees are starting to migrate into the northern Scotland areas. The core at Rowans was covered the longest vegetation, just because the peat was most intact there. It was the deepest part of peat that we could find. So that is why it's an older date. The other peat cores were, you see here that only at Dalchalk it's only 10,000. It only covers 10,000 years, and at Brehour 9,500 years. So Here I try to show you then that from 10,000 years ago, the vegetation looks like there are some birch, there are some willow, but there are still sedges and still quite an open landscape. And more trees are coming in a little bit later. There are some alder or some hazel trees are coming into the landscape. And then from this time, pine trees are also coming into the area. So the pine trees are slowly migrating further north and further north until they first arrive at this time in all 3 research sites. So that must have looked something like this. So there are birch trees are present, pine trees are present, and hazel trees. And still quite, it's open, but it's all, there are quite some trees around as well. And then the next one is that alder trees are also arriving in the area, and that's way later. So before that, there were no alder trees present, but the right, I will tell you a little bit more about it later, but the right temperature, the right climate made it possible that the alder trees were traveling, also migrated further north and came into the landscape. This is still the previous one. So there's a peak in pine pollen grains at this time. And that's just, it shows that the pine woodland became more denser. So it pushed away the birch trees that were present. And it's especially present, you can especially see it in Brehar, that the pine forest is more denser. Something like this. This is in Glen Everich today. I imagine that it must have looked something like this. Okay, so that was briefly the reconstruction of past woodland communities, very fast. So what are the reasons for these woodlands then to decline? Because we see that the trees were present in the landscape. So you would assume that they would continue to be there. What are the reasons for them for it to decline? So close to all sites in this study, there's a lot of archaeology present. So we know that people were present in the landscape. So all the red dots, this is Rowans. This is where I took the core into the peatland. So all the red dots are archaeological features found in the area. Especially the one that's quite well known in this area is the Kempster grey cairns. So they are located somewhere here, and they were probably occupied between 5,750 and 4,450 years ago. The interesting thing is that below the foundations of these round cairns, also microliths were found, and this suggests even that people from before even this time, so Mesolithic populations were in the area for a long time ago already. So it would be interesting to see if you can detect their presence in the signal of pollen grains that you saw in the diagram before, and I will show you that a little bit later, that you indeed can see that people are present in the landscape. And there's also Iron Age evidence by Brochs. There's a little bump in the grass there. This is the same one here, you can see it. So that's only Rowans, but also Brehar. Brehar has, for example, a lot of shieldings. So shieldings is a system that was practiced from at least the 11th century until 1800. And in this system, and probably it's way older, there is some pollen evidence that it might relate to that it's even older, but records show that it's at least from the 11th century. In this system, the shielding system, people in the summer months bring their livestock to remoter areas or to areas for grazing and stay there for a while and then move back when the season changes again. So there are little temporary huts, as you can call it, or little farms for the summer. So this system is still practiced in Scandinavia today, but not in Scotland anymore. And there are also chambered cairns, so that's Neolithic times again. And there's a henge, which is dated to about 3,500 years ago until 3,000 years ago. And then at Dalchork, there are a lot of hut circles found. Here you see a density of the hut circles. These are prehistoric roundhouses, and there are a lot throughout northern UK. And many of these hot circles have been recorded, but not a lot of them have been dated, and we don't know much about the distribution, the period of occupation, and also the economy of the inhabitants. So these hot circles at Daltrok haven't been dated, but some that were close by, a little bit more to the south, were dated to about 3,500 years ago. So yeah, maybe these ones are also from that time. Yeah, so I showed you what kind of archaeology is around, but can you also see then that maybe the people that lived in the area have any effect on, on the landscape, on the vegetation that is present? So how to detect people's presence in pollen data? Well, I didn't only use pollen grains. I also looked, for example, at charcoal, and charcoal, an increase of charcoal can indicate that people are present in the landscape. But of course, charcoal is just a remnant of also natural fire. So basically, often when the charcoal values are starting to increase and they stay more or less constant, that's an indication of people being present in the landscape. So for example, you can see here, the start of Mesolithic activity, there the charcoal is the blue line, starts to increase, and from that time it stays present. So we could assume that from this time, so Mesolithic hunter-gatherer societies or communities are present in the landscape in Rowans. Already a bit earlier in Daltrok and in Brehar, and even earlier in Daltrok. And the reason for this is probably that Rowans is the most northerly located site. So same as trees that are migrating northwards, people are also migrating northwards, possibly. Let me see. So yeah, I will show you a little bit more in detail. Just to zoom in. So this is the Mesolithic time, has been in other research in Scotland shows that the Mesolithic in Scotland is from about 7,000 years ago until 5,000. Is that true? Oh, no, a little bit older, 9,000 to 6,000 years ago. And in Rowans, Mesolithic communities were probably present around this time, so the peaking charcoal again. Here there's a little bit of charcoal, but also a lot of movement in the ground. This pollen grain of Plantago lanceolata, so that's ripwort plantain, is an indicator of people being present in the landscape as well. So if you find that one, you can definitely say, okay, people were in the landscape with their livestock being around. And then here again, from 9,000 years ago in Daltrok, a big peak in charcoal. And that's then linked again in Rowans, for example, to those Mesolithic flints that were found below the Great Cairns of Campsted. And the Neolithic, that's the Neolithic is the moment that agriculture really starts around the world. That's the term for Neolithic. In Rowans, the first evidence of cereal grain, so the presence of barley, has been found around 5,000 years ago. There's also increase in that ripwort plantain pollen grain that I showed before, which shows the livestock in the area, people in the area. So we can say almost for certain that Neolithic communities were farming around 5,000 years ago in Rowans, a little bit earlier in Brehar, and all around the same time across northern Scotland, people were spreading out and starting their Neolithic lifestyle. So that relates also with the Great Cairns of Campsted at Rowans. So these communities might have directly influenced the landscape that was present at the time, used the landscape at the time. The Bronze Age, it's a time of intensification in agriculture, you can see that the ripwort plantain pollen grain is increasing indeed, and again there are cereal grains are found, and this is only one pollen grain, so you would think like, okay, maybe that's not really evidence of that grains are really there, but how the plants grow from cereal grains is that the pollen grains really stay into the plant, so they don't release many pollen grains. So even one pollen grain of barley is already indicating that it's rather local, local use and presence of barley. And the interesting thing is, so what you would assume is if there's an increase in charcoal, that people are trying to improve the land by maybe burning down the present trees. So you would, by burning down the land, burning down the trees, you would create like a good agricultural land. So you would assume that if the charcoal is going up, the woodland is going down, which is the case here. But the green line is birch. So birch is going down. They might, burn areas where birch is present. But hazel, sorry, it's a bit small. Hazel is going up. So that's interesting. So perhaps they were coppicing the hazel trees, because if you're coppicing them, you get more nut yield from hazelnuts. So yeah, people might have been managing the landscape at this time already, and didn't just use all the trees that were present, but really selectively, increased some wood species presence. For example, the hazel. And this is then again relating to the hot circles that were present at Dalchalk. Okay. The agriculture is intensifying. There are some more events of coppicing. So the hazel here again, it's increasing when charcoal is also increasing. And here the alder is increasing. So maybe they wanted, there was not much woodland present at this time to begin with, but the remaining trees, they probably didn't just chop them down. They tried to get as much wood as possible to use in their lives. So with this slide, I want to show you that people were in the landscape, but were they the reason that woodland declined? Did they use the trees that were present intensely? And was that the reason that woodland declined? Well, actually, here, for example, at Rowans, you see that actually trees are already starting to decline long before people are becoming present in the landscape. And when people are present in the landscape, like trees are more or less, they decline sometimes, but they recover all the time. So yeah, it looks actually that there's something happened before people were coming in the landscape. So people might not directly relate to the woodland declining. The same is for Brehauer, like the trees are already declining right before people are really becoming present in the landscape. Only at Dalchalk it might relate, well, no, people were already in the landscape and trees are only declining a little bit later, but they're recovering again and declining later. So it's not, you can say that it's not certain that people are the reason of the lack of trees in this area. So what would be the reason then? So as we can see also today, but also in the past, climate has changed. So the last 10,000 years, there have been several events that that put impact on our life or on our planet. There are events of warmer climate, events of colder climate, and this might have influenced the woodland present in those areas. So another big diagram. This shows, for Northern Scotland, I tried to identify different climatic events, so cold periods, warm periods, but also volcanic eruptions. And I will show you with some of these. So these are all the ones that I identified that might say something about anything happening to the woodlands, whether there's a relationship or not. So we'll just pick a few and talk a little bit more about them. So one moment. So the 9.4 and the 8.2 Ka events, so they happened about 9.4 thousand years ago and 8.2 thousand years ago. yeah, the 9.4 event relates to ice sheet advancement and cooling in northwestern Europe. And yeah, they're both short-lived climatic deterioration. So yeah, changing climate that it's drier in Central and Eastern Asia and Africa and the Mediterranean and parts of Northern America, but it's wetter in Southern America and in Northern Europe. So these periods, yeah, so Northern Europe is also Scotland. There are periods of a lot more rainfall in Scotland. And what you can see is actually at 9.4 thousand years ago, this is here, you see that the birch trees at Rowans are declining. So this might then relate to the changes in climate for, I think the changes were maybe 50 years or something, that they were so severe that woodlands didn't really thrive in these regions anymore. And Breyer, you see that willow that was once present just completely declines and will never recover again. And Dalthorpe as well, you see birch is declining. Yeah. So that was a colder event, a wet and cold event. But also has also been a warmer event, or several of them. But I've selected now the mid-Holocene optimum. So in this time, so it's this is when it is 6,000 years ago. The climate was warmer and moist, and the peak in temperatures is at the mid-Holocene maximum. And summer temperatures were probably about almost 2 degrees higher than it is today in northern Scotland, northern UK. It's also the time that most woodland types that are now present in Scotland, came in those regions, and still that's still reflected today. So still today in the north, in the Isles, you have birch-dominated woodlands. In the center, you have pine-dominated woodlands, and then the green in the south, you have oak-dominated woodlands, and the pink in the east and the west coast is hazel and oak-dominated woodland. So those woodland communities were already present 6,000 years ago, and it did change, of course, over time because also woodlands declined. But the remnants of these trees, woodlands, are still seen today. It's also the time that the alder trees are expanding into Scotland. So they're migrating way later than all the other trees. Probably they really profited by the warmer climate at this time. So then a little bit about volcanic eruptions. So volcanic eruptions, they spread large quantities of sulfur-rich gases into the stratosphere. And this can cause climatic cooling of only 0.2, 0.3 degrees for several years after volcanic eruption. And also they can cause an increase in precipitation. So the volcanic ash, or volcanic tephra, as you also call it, these tephra layers are found in the peatland across the UK. But it's so they deposited on the peatland, so on the vegetation or on the woodland that was present. But it's not sure whether volcanic eruptions did affect any of the vegetation that was there at the time. So it's been said before that the Hekla 4 eruption, so it's an eruption of a volcano in Iceland that erupted around 4,200 years ago. So it's here. It's been said before that that is the cause of a decline in pine trees around northern UK. And as you can see, at this time, the pine trees, I highlighted it a little bit. So pine trees are indeed declining, and here as well, and here as well. So there are not many pine trees left in the area to begin with, but it does look like there is a signal that even the trees that were present further decline. But at the same time, there is also a climatic event called the 4.2 Ka event, which is related to, again, wetter and colder climates. So it's very difficult to say for certain that it's related to the volcanic eruption. Maybe it's just a combination of the two, and even human impact can relate to it as well. So it's a very difficult question, but it's interesting to see that, you do see a change in the pine trees densities in the areas. So the final one is the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age appears to have been triggered during periods of reduced solar activity. And in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, there are records that, I think they're from estate and rental farms, that communities are protecting themselves against climate-driven falls in agricultural productivity during this time, and they are adjusting to different crop practices. So they are changing their way of lifestyle, which is interesting. So there, probably something happened that can be linked to the Little Ice Age, that it's colder again. And there's increase in storm activity, and people had to change their lifestyle. And it's also the time, which is very interesting, like the remaining trees present in these areas. So there's definitely there are not much trees present, but it's an open landscape with some trees still. At this time, at Rowans and Brear, trees are even further declining, and it really looks like, because there's a low presence of charcoal, so people are not really present in the area at this time, and it really looks like this Little Ice Age was the final drop, that the final threshold that made all the trees decline. So around the world, cultural development, including changes in settlement patterns, have been linked to events of climate change during the Holocene, and people appear to have adapted to and even thrived in marginal environments. And it's funny because the cultural adaptation is also seen in this study, because every time a climatic event happens, so the climate changes, a new culture starts. So at 9.4 thousand years ago, it's after the event that the Mesolithic communities come into the area. And Brear, you can see that at this climatic event, the Mesolithic communities come into the area as well. So it's, there is a push of people doing something different, that changes the lifestyle. And the start of the Neolithic, it's after the 5.2 event, so it changed in wetter climate again, that at all sites, it's the start of the Neolithic. Let's go on. So the final bit of my research was to see how I can use this data to contribute to the future woodland conservation, or the management of future woodland. Can we bring those, now I know what the natural woodland would have been in the past, can we bring those trees back in the area, or is it not possible? So what I did is, I looked at what the goals are for Scotland. So the government of Scotland, the Scottish government, want to increase woodland cover by 21% in 2032. They want to increase the woodland cover, and they want to put more natural woodlands in different areas. But would that work for these peatlands? So the woodland communities that I detected in these areas in the past are upland birch woodlands and native pine woods, and upland oak woods. So these were the types that I found in my research that have been present in the past. So if you want to reintroduce them, you have to know if they will thrive nowadays. So it looks like the ground is suitable for upland birchwood. So if it's green, it's suitable for those trees to grow there in present day. So in the future, we don't know yet, but in present day, it would be suitable. Native pine woods, it's not the best, but it will work. But this type of woodland that I found that was present in the past will not be able to grow presently. This one can grow presently, but I never found in my research that this one has been present in the past. So it's not a natural woodland for this area. So these two we won't look at. But they will grow today, but will they grow in the future? So there are predictions about how climate is going to change around the world, so also for Scotland. And it's been researched that in the northern Scotland area, so the area of research here, the temperature will increase with about 2 degrees in the next coming 100 years. And that's actually for yeah, the rest of Scotland it's way more. So for this northern part, it's not that much. Also, there will be an increase in precipitation, so more rain is going to it will rain more in these areas. So 2 degrees warmer from now in 100 years. Actually, in the mid-Holocene maximum, it was also 2 degrees warmer. So what we could do is we could look at what kind of woodlands were present at that time. Then possibly they will thrive again in the future. So we'll make them durable for the future. And the trees that were present, as I said before, like the alder trees were coming into the area. So alder has been present, hazel was present, pine was present, and birch was present. And then, a combination of how the woodland community looked like. I think I missed one slide. Yeah, that's a shame. Okay, there was one more slide that tells you a little bit more about about the peatland area. So what would happen if you plant certain trees in the peatland landscapes nowadays? And it showed that within 100 years, if you reforest it again with the non-native coniferous trees like Sitka spruce and lodgepole pine, then the ground, the peatlands will never, within 100 years, will start to store carbon. They will always release carbon over the next 100 years again. And the same is for pine trees. Pine trees are not suitable for the landscape because the carbon will not be stored, but because of they will just release all the carbon in the air again. So it turned out that only broadleaf trees are most suitable to be planted in the area, but not just on the peatlands. It would be best if broadleaf trees will be brought back close to rivers, close to the edges of peatlands, so a more natural development can continue to exist. I think that is it for now. So woodlands changed over space and time and consisted mainly of birch, hazel and alder. And past woodlands in northern Scotland mainly declined and changed due to climatic events. But human impact may have caused the woodlands never to expand again. So you saw a big drop in woodland presence before people were even present in the landscape, but they never recovered. And maybe that was because people were in the landscape and they did use the trees there. So the focus of native woodland development should be on the deciduous woodland, and this includes upland birchwoods, wet woodlands, and native woodland expansion in these areas should take into account what the impact will be on the peatlands, and reinstatement should only occur when achieving the best conditions for both peatland and woodland habitats. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jasmijn. I'm applauding on behalf of everyone. We also have a message here from Peter Vissers, who says that he has to leave, but he wants to thank you very much for your clear explanations about your work.
That's great.
Let's see, I've upgraded Jane and Jen to panelists as well. So Jane and Jen, you have the ability now, I think, to unmute yourselves if you want to say anything. Oh yes, here's Jen. Hello, Jen.
Good to see you.
Hello, and to see the doctor there ahead of your name.
Yeah. I was like, should I add the doctor in front of my name? But I was like, yeah,
you
again now.
Should. Yeah, well done. Thank you. It was a really good presentation. I don't have any particular questions, but there was one in the chat there about the dating method and pollen and peat depths. And did you see the question?
I didn't, because I was busy talking.
Jen, or I can read it out if you want. Do you want to read it out, Jen?
How do you know what date pollen was present at in the core? Given peat develops at different rates on different sites and depth doesn't equal age. I suspect radiocarbon dating comes into play here, but yeah, Jasmijn?
Yeah, Jasmijn. So I used radiocarbon dating for quite some points in the pollen records or in the cores. So I think I had about not too many, but I had 5 dates per core. And And then you can model it. There are programs, age-step modeling. So if you know all the in-between times, you can see the rate of development, and it can give you an age for every sample. So it's still not the complete certain age, but because we have many different certain carbon dates, then yeah, it's a good start.
I think 5 dates per core is pretty decent.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, thank you. Right, another question has just come in. I might as well just read that since I'm talking. A colder, wetter climate is often given as a reason for natural woodland decline in the highlands. I can see how this would affect pine, but surely birch would flourish in wet, peaty conditions. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I did say now that it's always wet and cold, but it's also quite sometimes dry and cold. And I don't know what, and an increase in wind and an overall increase, and maybe just that the trees lack to adapt quick enough to a little change, or even if it's a few degrees. Yeah, maybe because they've been on a certain location for quite a while, that small change will already cause them to decline. But especially in these northern areas, again, there was not so much woodland to begin with, so these little triggers can just push them over the edge.
Alan McDonald is asking, is it possible to say that either climate change or human activity is the more significant driver of change in woodland, or are the two inextricably linked?
Yeah, so what I have found is like because I'm really looking in the north of the country. I can't speak for other areas, but in the north of the country, it really looks like the major woodland decline was there before people were even present in the landscape. But the reason that maybe woodland never recovered was, again, because people were in the landscape. So the reason for the major decline is climate, but then to never develop again, it's people. And probably a combination. It's very difficult to really, yeah.
I was actually feeling quite optimistic listening to your presentation there, because I must admit that sometimes when I read news and predictions about future climate change, it makes me feel quite panicky. But your story shows that people and nature have both been able to adapt to fluctuating temperatures.
But the only thing that is different is that it's at this rate, and yeah, it's not really natural in how it's going now. So you can see that it's been warmer in the past, but it was in a different way than it's going now. So yeah, I hope that nature and plants, trees will adapt and that they will continue and change. And also a problem often is that if you have a type of woodland, like for example, you have pine trees, like a Caledonian forest, a lot of people want to preserve it as that type of woodland, but we should make it open for the woodland to develop and change, because that is more natural, the succession of a woodland to develop. And I think that, yeah, as long as we can be open about that, or like, yeah, give that a chance. And
hi, Jasmijn, that was really good to hear you. Can I come in now with a question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I was really interested in you looking at 6,000 BP and now, and the comparisons between the temperature change. Another factor, I think, is increased storminess and therefore wind, and bringing the salt, which I think really harms trees and is maybe one factor, particularly here in Orkney, why trees don't grow back or don't grow well. So I wondered if that was something that you could factor in or had been looking at in terms of the robustness of trees and the potential for replanting.
Yeah, I think for Orkney that is definitely the case. For Scotland, the biggest problem is the deer population, the deer density and the grazing. Because I've spent, before I moved back to Amsterdam, I spent a lot of time in the flow country peatlands, and areas that were covered off by fences. woodland is developing quite naturally. But areas that haven't been fenced off, they are just, yes, still just peatlands, and nothing is no trees are growing on there. And I always encounter so many deers there. So it's definitely, they are just browsing on anything that tries to grow. So I think that's the biggest problem. So if we want to reinstate these woodlands, we have to do something about that. And then for Scotland, yeah, there are no deer on Orkney. There are no deer on Orkney. So yeah, then I think the wind is a major contributor for in Orkney that trees aren't able to expand and develop. So I don't know how to go about that. Like, yeah, he can't really provide shelter everywhere for just the trees to develop.
No. And there's a question relating to deer. Did you find any reindeer antlers when you were peat coring, or do you know any of, I guess?
Interesting. No. I also have never really heard or read anything about reindeer antlers, actually. But that would be interesting if they would have been here. But I'm not sure if they would have still been here only 10,000 years ago, maybe before that. But I really don't know.
Okay, and I'll read out another question from Nigel Jennings saying, interesting talk. Can you expand on what might happen in the future with global warming? Will blanket bog dry? So you're being asked now to provide answers on big questions. Will a blanket bog dry?
I know that in the people that are present here, there are quite a lot of peatland experts, so maybe one of them should answer the question. But yeah, no, I think research shows that peatlands can cope with a lot, and that they will also, naturally evolve with increases in temperature, and they regulate the water themselves. So yeah, I think peatlands will be fine as long as we don't invest again in planting the wrong trees or trees at all, or if we find another way to just extract peatlands and not restore them.
The second part of that question was, will tree species regenerate in northern Scotland simply due to warmer, wetter climate? So will they do it unaided, I guess?
If they have a chance without a deer being present, yes. Yeah, I've seen that it's possible, but they won't just go on the peatlands. They would really just follow the little streams, and they will follow areas with thinner peat, and they will not really go and expand on the peatlands, probably. So yeah, a little bit, but yeah, not massively.
There's a follow-up from David Headington about the reindeer question here too. It says the Orkney saga mentions the Jarls going to Caithness to hunt red deer and reindeer in the 12th century. And then it says maybe one for Ragnhild for me, but I'll hand it over to you. Did you look at that period?
Yeah, no, I looked at that period, but yeah, I don't know anything about it. No, yeah, it's the interesting thing is that in also pollen analysis and pollen research, you can identify grazing. So that was even more to go into for now. But yeah, I did look into intensification of grazing and could relate that either to wild animals grazing or to livestock grazing. But yeah, you can't pinpoint it to what species was grazing where in the landscape. So that's really difficult. Yeah, so it would be interesting if the Caithness people were hunting reindeer. Quite interesting.
Yeah, I don't have the passage from the saga here to hand at the moment, but just going from memory, I think they're talking about deer hunting. And that the point is that they can't hunt deer in Orkney.
As a zoo archaeologist, so I look at ones. I know a little bit about this. We have red deer here in Orkney in the very early contexts in the Viking Age. So deer are present and then they quickly disappear. from the archaeological record, and then that correlates with the saga evidence. I'm not a historian in any way, but I think the saga might just say deer, leaving open the really interesting question of what sort of deer. And we know that reindeer and red deer, all the different types of antler have slightly different properties, and they're really important for making the composite bone and antler combs that are riveted and they're beautiful, and they have all sorts of meaning beyond simple hair combs. And Steve Ashby has written extensively about this, and including about the role of deer within Viking Orkney and Caithness. And I haven't read it for a while, so Steve Ashby's the go-to person for anything about deer, really. Yeah, interesting question though. I was noticing in the news recently there's talk of making this huge forest in northern England, going across coast to coast, with millions of trees going to be planted. I was wondering if you've read anything about this. It seems on the face of it a great idea, but then I think, oh, yeah, what are they doing? Is it native woodland? Does it really matter if it's not native woodland? Do you think they're looking at any sort of long-term time perspectives with that, or even considering the role of climate change?
About that. Yeah, I don't know about that area specifically, but I do wonder if, I think by now people realize that they should look into the further future if that's possible, but they don't realize just yet that you can use paleoecology for that, because long term is for them monitoring 30 years. But in 30 years, that's not a climatic event like that and especially vegetation, plants, trees are responding a little bit later. And I hope they take it into account, and I definitely hope they really put it. They plant trees. Doesn't matter if it's not natural or whether it's natural. I think, but as long as it's really suitable for the ground that they're putting it on. And now the idea is that everyone is on. We have to plant trees. That's the only solution, or that's what we have to do. But then the problem is that in the peatland areas in northern Scotland, please don't plant trees. Because peatlands are storing way more carbon than trees could ever do. So if you destroy that, you will release even more carbon into the air. So that would be very, very silly and very stupid. But I know that Forestry Land Scotland, they have regulations about how deep peat must be before you can plant, or like how shallow it should be. They are not allowed to plant on peatlands that are deeper than 50 centimeters. So there are regulations, but then still, yeah. I think it's just not, it's all about the trees. And I think there should be more about peatlands.
I just wanted to pass on some thanks from people in the audience here. Alison Craig says, thank you very much. And Mike Anton says, congrats to Dr. Sybenga on your work. Great presentation.
Very nice.
I'm sure everyone is feeling the same way. I was just going to ask, or sorry, Jane, did you want to come in there?
Oh, I had a question of my own, but I was going to read out another one as well. Shall I do that?
Yes.
Yeah. So pine and birch are regrowing on previously deforested exposed coasts in southwestern Norway, where, according to weather data, wind speeds and salt spray are as high as anything in northwest Scotland and the Northern Isles. So I guess it's a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, it's true, because also in Siberia, trees are present on peatlands. So there is something about the Scottish bogs. So trees would be able to expand, but as long as they don't take all the water from the peatlands, that should also be keeping the peatlands healthy. So it's very difficult, because there are so many areas in the world that it's very common to have wooded peatland. But yeah.
I just wanted to end with a question about your future, because you've talked about the future, but I'm curious about your future. And I think it's really inspiring to see how a PhD in archaeology can lead to an exciting career that's not as an academic. So I was just wondering if you could tell us how you use the experience you gained from doing the PhD in your new job.
So Because the Forestry and Land Scotland, they were the one that funded me. So I also had a lot of meetings and talks with them during the course of my PhD. So they don't have an archaeological, yeah, they do have some archaeology within them, but they were really onto the conservation of woodland and really into the nature aspect of things. So and also in the palaeoecology, I really had to learn everything about habitats, ecosystems, and things like that. So, and I really found it interesting. And then after my PhD, I worked for the RSPB for a while because that was already full lockdown, and I was able to just go on my own into the peatland areas of RSPB and learned a lot about more nature conservation things. And I think those experiences helped me to be able to get a career in a different it's a different field, but like I did get enough practice and knowledge to be able to probably able to take on this this other job. And it's really interesting. I really like to use something that I learned about past people in the past, climate in the past, nature in the past, and use that for present day and the future. So you get such a big time lapse. Like, I think that's really interesting. And I can, because of archaeology, I can look further than only the few years that a lot of people probably can only imagine. So I think that's very valuable to also see how the future will go.
Yeah, it gives you a wider perspective on things. Anne Gascoigne wanted to pass on a message to Anne. Says, thank you, Dr. Sybenga, and congratulations. When you did your last talk to Orkney Field Club, you were still furiously counting pollen grains. Well done.
Yeah, so in the end, I counted 180,000 pollen grains and spores and some other things, but it were 180,000, and it took me 2 years. So if anyone wants to do a PhD in paleoecology, that is what you get. But it was good.
I'm very impressed. Okay, anybody else? We're at 5 o'clock now, and it's time to finish this and go out and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Jasmijn. It's been absolutely fascinating, and it's been really lovely to see you again as well.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good to see you. See ya.